I knew my life was over the second the glass slipped from my hand. The tray tilted. Ice scattered across the table. Amber liquor splashed straight into a man's lap, staining his expensive gray suit while the entire bar went silent around me. For one frozen second, all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding inside my skull. Then the yelling started. I apologized so fast I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking. The customer stood up swearing at me while everyone stared like I was some pathetic little sideshow. I kept saying I was sorry, over and over, but the truth was, I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. My son had been sick all week, rent was overdue, and I'd spent my last $20 buying cough medicine instead of groceries. When my manager finally stepped in, I thought he was there to save me. I was wrong. He handled the angry customer with that fake calm smile he always used, then looked at me and quietly said, "Office." Now. I remember walking behind him, feeling like I was heading to my own execution. My knees felt weak. Every horrible possibility kept crashing through my head at once. No paycheck. No rent. No electricity. No food in the fridge for my kid. I started crying before he even closed the office door. I begged him not to fire me, and when begging didn't work, I offered him the only thing I still had left to bargain with. That was 3 months ago. And not a single day has passed where I haven't hated myself for what happened in that office. By the time I was 17, I already felt 40. Most girls my age were worried about prom dresses, college applications, or sneaking out with boys their parents hated. I was learning how to stretch a box of macaroni for 3 meals and figuring out which bills could survive being ignored another week. My son, Mason, was born 2 months after my 16th birthday. His father disappeared before I even started showing. One day he was promising we'd figure it out together, and the next his number stopped working. I heard later he moved 2 states away with some other girl. I don't even know if Mason remembers his face anymore. Not that he asks. Kids learn pretty early when certain questions hurt too much. I dropped out of school halfway through junior year because daycare cost more money than I could make. I told myself I'd get my GED eventually, but eventually turned into years. Years turned into survival mode. Survival mode turned into exhaustion. So constant it started feeling normal. The bar job was supposed to be temporary. That's the funny part. At 18, I walked into Velvet Room wearing borrowed heels and cheap makeup, telling myself I'd only stay long enough to save money and get my life together. But life has a way of trapping people exactly where they're weakest. Especially women like me. Women without degrees, without family, without backup plans. The money wasn't terrible on good nights. Drunk businessmen tipped well if you laughed at their jokes and touched their arm at the right moment. I learned quickly how to smile even when my feet were bleeding and my head felt heavy enough to split open. You stop thinking about dignity after a while. You think about rent, medicine, school shoes, electric bills. You think about survival. And survival changes you slowly enough that you barely notice it happening until one night you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back at you anymore. The Velvet Room looked glamorous if you'd never worked there. That was the trick. From the outside, it was all gold lighting, polished marble, expensive perfume, and women in tight black dresses, weaving between tables carrying cocktails with names nobody could pronounce sober. Men came there to feel important. Women came there to forget things. And people like me came there because desperation doesn't leave room for pride. By 9 o'clock every night, the music got loud enough to rattle my ribs. The customers blurred together after a while. Bachelor parties. Rich couples pretending not to hate each other. Men with wedding rings who stared too long and tipped better the more uncomfortable they made you. Sometimes they'd ask me if I was in college. I got pretty good at lying. Business administration. I'd say with a smile. It sounded better then. I got pregnant at 15 and never finished high school. My manager, Rick, had worked there almost as long as I had, mid-40s, always smelled faintly like cologne and cigarette smoke. He wasn't the kind of boss who screamed or threw things. Honestly, I almost wish he had been. Cruel people are easier to hate when they act cruel openly. Rick was worse. He was calm. The kind of calm that made you feel stupid for struggling. Whenever I was late because Mason's school called or the babysitter canceled, Rick would sigh like I was personally exhausting him. Whenever I looked tired, he'd say things like, "You need to get your life together, Joan." Like I hadn't been trying for 10 straight years. Still, I needed the job, and he knew it. I think that's the part that keeps replaying in my head now. The way he looked at me sometimes, not attracted exactly, but aware. Like he could see every weak spot in my life just by watching me carry drinks across the room, and maybe he could. Because people who are drowning start looking different after a while. You move differently, talk differently, panic faster. Predators notice those things. I just didn't realize yet that someone had already noticed me. The day everything fell apart started at 4:12. That morning when Mason crawled into my bed burning with fever. I barely opened my eyes before his small hand touched my arm. "Mom," he whispered weakly. "My throat hurts." The sound of his voice alone told me he was sick. I spent the next 2 hours switching between cold washcloths, children's medicine, and checking the clock every 5 minutes because missing work wasn't an option anymore. I was already 2 weeks behind on rent. My landlord had taped a final notice to the apartment door 3 days earlier in thick red letters that felt impossible to ignore. By noon, Mason's fever, finally, dropped enough for him to sleep on the couch while our elderly neighbor agreed to watch him. During my shift, I almost called out anyway. Something in my chest felt wrong all day, heavy like my body was warning me about something before my brain caught up, but calling out meant risking my job, and risking my job meant risking everything, so I went. The second I walked into Velvet Room, I knew it was going to be bad. 2 waitresses had already called off. The bar was packed because some finance convention was happening downtown. Men in expensive suits crowded the tables, loud and drunk, before sunset. Rick took one look at me while I clocked in and frowned. "You look terrible," he muttered. I wanted to laugh at that. Instead, I tied my apron tighter and started my shift. For the first few hours, I survived on autopilot. Smile, deliver drinks, laugh politely, ignore the comments, ignore the headache pounding behind my eyes, ignore my feet aching inside cheap black heels. Then around 10:30, table 12 sat down. 4 men, already drunk, already loud. One of them snapped his fingers at me before I even reached the table. And somehow, deep down, I think part of me already knew they were the beginning of the end. By the time I carried their second round of drinks over, my hands were trembling hard enough that I had to grip the tray with both hands. Table 12 had spent the last hour treating me like entertainment instead of a person. "Smile, sweetheart. Come on. You'd look prettier if you fixed that attitude." One of them kept staring openly at my chest every time I leaned near the table, like he wasn't even embarrassed about it. Normally I could ignore men like that. After years at Velvet Room, you either learned to shut your emotions off or you drowned in them. But that night, everything felt sharper. The noise, the lights, the exhaustion. My phone had buzzed twice already with texts from my landlord. "Pay me by Friday, no more." Excuses. I remember reading those messages in the service hallway while trying not to cry. Then Rick yelled that drinks were backing up, so I wiped my face, grabbed the tray, and walked back out there pretending I was okay. Wasn't. The moment itself happened so fast it almost felt unreal. One of the men at table 12 stood suddenly while laughing at something his friend said. His shoulder clipped the edge of my tray. The glasses tipped. I tried to save them, God. I tried. But the whiskey sour slid straight off the tray and exploded across the front of his suit. The glass shattered against the floor. Silence. The entire table froze. Then the man looked down at himself and exploded. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, jumping to his feet. "Do you know how much this suit costs?" "I'm so sorry," I said immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "You people are unbelievable. You people." Like I wasn't even human anymore. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. While every nearby table turned to stare at me, I dropped to my knees automatically, trying to pick up broken glass with shaking fingers before someone got hurt. That's when Rick appeared. "Sir, I deeply apologize," he said smoothly, stepping between us. "We'll cover the dry cleaning, and your next round is on the house." The customer kept ranting while Rick calmly nodded along. Then Rick turned toward me. His expression didn't even look angry. That somehow made it worse. "Joan," he said quietly, "my office. Now." And suddenly, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. The walk to Rick's office couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but it felt longer than the last 10 years of my life combined. Every pair of eyes in the bar followed me. Some people looked uncomfortable, some looked curious, a few looked relieved it wasn't them. I kept hearing the customer's voice echoing in my head. "You people are unbelievable." By the time I stepped into the office, my breathing had already turned uneven. Rick closed the door behind us with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than the music. Outside, The room smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. I stood there twisting my hands together while he sat behind his desk scrolling through something on his computer like this was any other conversation. Rick, I started quickly. I swear it was an accident. He stood up. And you've been slipping for months, Joan. His voice stayed calm, taut flat, professional. That scared me more than yelling would have. I know, I whispered. I know I haven't been perfect lately, but my son's been sick, and we all have problems. The words hit harder than I expected. I felt tears immediately burning behind my eyes. I can do better, I said desperately. Please, just give me another chance. I'll pick up extra shifts. I'll do anything. Rick leaned back in his chair and stared at me for a long moment without speaking. That silence nearly broke me, because deep down, I already knew. People like him didn't need to say no right away. They let you panic first, let you humiliate yourself trying to survive. Finally, he sighed. I can't keep covering for you anymore. Something inside my chest collapsed. No, the word barely came out. Rick, please, please don't do this to me. I started crying then. Real crying, ugly, desperate crying. I couldn't stop even though I hated myself for it. My son needs me, I choked out. I have nowhere else to go. I can't lose this job. Rick looked away for a second, tapping his fingers slowly against the desk. Then he said something that still wakes me up at night. There are ways people show appreciation when someone helps them out, Joan. At first, I didn't understand. Then I did, and the worst part, for one horrible second, I actually considered it before he even finished speaking. I wish I could tell you I stood up right then and walked out. I wish I could say I threw something at him, screamed, reported him, did literally anything except what actually happened. But fear does strange things to people when they've spent too long surviving. Especially mothers. My mind stopped working normally after that sentence. It was like every thought inside my head split apart at once. Rent, Mason, groceries, school clothes, the electric bill sitting unpaid on the kitchen counter. I remember staring at the carpet because I couldn't look at him anymore. The office suddenly felt too small, too hot. Rick didn't move from behind his desk. He just watched me quietly. Like he already knew desperation would make the decision for me. You're a good worker, he said softly. I don't want to lose you over one bad night. The way he said it almost sounded kind. That's what disgusts me most now. Not just what happened, but how easily he made it sound reasonable. My entire body felt numb as I stepped closer to the desk. Somewhere deep inside me, a voice kept screaming at me to stop. But another voice, the louder one, kept picturing Mason, asleep on our couch with his dinosaur blanket wrapped around him. What choice do you have? What happens if you lose everything? Those thoughts kept crushing everything else. I couldn't even feel my own hands shaking anymore. I just remember the unbearable humiliation of knowing exactly what he thought I was, a desperate single mother too cornered to say no. And maybe he was right. The whole thing felt unreal, like I'd stepped outside my own body and was watching someone else ruin her life from across the room. I stared at the floor the entire time. At one point, I focused on a scuff mark near Rick's shoe because somehow that felt easier than remembering what I was doing. When it was over, there was this horrible silence. Rick adjusted his shirt calmly and said, "Take tomorrow off. Come back Friday." Like we'd just discussed scheduling. I stood there frozen for a second, unable to breathe. Then I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office without saying a single word, and somehow the music outside was still playing like the world hadn't just ended. I threw up in the parking lot before I even made it to my car. 1 second I was walking across the cracked asphalt, trying to breathe normally, and the next I was bent over near the curb, shaking so hard I could barely stay standing. Nobody came to help me. People just walked past pretending not to notice. I remember wiping my mouth with the back of my hand and suddenly realizing I still smelled like the office, like cigarettes and whiskey and shame. The thought made my stomach twist. All over again. The drive home felt endless. Every red light gave my brain another chance to replay what happened. You did that? No one forced you. You chose it. That last thought kept hitting hardest, even though part of me knew desperation had cornered me long before that office door closed. When I finally got home, the apartment was dark except for the flickering television light in the living room. Mrs. Hernandez had already left, but Mason was asleep on the couch exactly where I'd imagined him earlier, curled under his dinosaur blanket, with one arm hanging off the cushion. For a second, I just stood there staring at him, 10 years old, still small enough to fall asleep waiting for me, and all I could think was, I did it for you? But another voice inside me answered immediately, no, you lost yourself for him. I went straight to the bathroom after that. I scrubbed my skin so hard under the shower that it turned red. I washed my mouth until the mint toothpaste burned. Then I sat on the floor of the tub with the water running cold around me, while I tried not to fall apart completely. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the bathroom mirror to fog over. Long enough for the water bill I couldn't afford to stop. Mattering. At some point, I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe properly. Not because of Rick, not even because of what happened, but because deep down, I realized something terrifying. Part of me believed this was exactly the kind of thing women, like me, were eventually supposed to become: poor, disposable and desperate, enough to trade pieces of themselves just to survive another month. And once that thought gets inside your head, it's hard to scrape it back out. The next morning, I almost didn't go back. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at my phone for nearly an hour, trying to figure out whether losing the job would hurt worse than walking back into that building again. But then Mason came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and asked if we still had cereal left. And just like that, the decision stopped being mine. By Friday night, I was back at Velvet Room wearing the same black dress, the same heels, the same fake smile. Nothing about the place had changed. That felt cruel somehow. The music still pounded through the walls. Customers still laughed too loudly. Glasses still clinked behind the bar. Meanwhile, I felt like someone had hollowed me out from the inside. The worst part was seeing Rick again. He acted completely normal. Evening, Joan, he said while checking inventory sheets. That was it. No awkwardness, no guilt, no acknowledgement of what happened in his office. At first, I almost convinced myself maybe that was a good thing. Maybe we could both pretend it never happened. Then around midnight, I walked into the storage room to grab more cocktail napkins. Rick followed me inside. The second the door closed behind him, my stomach dropped. You okay? He asked casually. I nodded too quickly. Yeah. His eyes moved over me slowly in a way they never had before. That's when I understood something had changed. Not for me. For him. The line was gone now, and once someone realizes desperation can make you surrender once, they stop seeing you the same afterward. Rick stepped closer. You know, he said quietly, I took a pretty big risk keeping you here after that scene. My chest tightened immediately. There it was, not kindness, not mercy, debt, invisible debt, wrapped around my throat. I said thank you. I whispered. Rick smiled slightly. I think you can do a little better than that. I felt cold all over. Suddenly, the storage room seemed too small, the shelves too close together, the air too heavy to breathe properly. My mind flashed back to the office so violently I almost felt sick again. And for the first time since that night, anger pushed through the shame, not at myself, at him. I didn't say anything. Right away. That silence felt different from the one in his office. Back then, I'd gone quiet because I was collapsing. This time, I went quiet because something inside me was finally waking up. Rick watched me like he was waiting for the same version of me to appear again, the exhausted, cornered one who would just accept whatever pressure he applied next. But I wasn't standing in that office anymore. I was in a storage room behind a bar, smelling bleach and cardboard boxes, with my hands shaking for a completely different reason. I can't keep doing this, I said finally. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steadier too. Rick tilted his head slightly. Doing what? The way he asked it, calm, almost amused, made my stomach turn. Like he genuinely didn't understand, or like he was pretending not to. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to look away this time. You know what I mean? For the first time, his expression shifted. Not anger, not panic, just a subtle disappointment, like I'd failed a test I didn't realize I was taking. Joan, he said slowly, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Something inside me snapped at that word. Misunderstanding. Like I was the problem. For seeing things clearly, my hands curled into fists at my sides before I even realized it. No, I said, louder now. I understand it perfectly. The air between us tightened. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I took a step back. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. I don't care about the job. I don't care about whatever you think I owe you. I can't live like this. Rick studied me for a long moment, like he was recalculating something. Then he gave a small, tired sigh. Be careful, Joan, he said quietly. People in your position don't usually get to make demands. That word again, position, like. I was an object on a shelf instead of a human being trying to survive. He turned and walked out of the storage room like the conversation was finished. But for me, something had just started. Because for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost, I was thinking about what I still had left to fight for. After Rick left, I stayed in that storage room for a full minute without moving. I could still hear the bar through the walls, laughter, glass clinking, music pulsing like nothing had changed, like my entire world hadn't just split into before and after. Inside a cramped room that smelled like mop water, my hands were still shaking, but not from fear this time, from something sharper, anger, maybe, or clarity, I couldn't tell yet. I kept replaying his words in my head. People in your position don't usually get to make demands. That sentence stuck to me in a way I didn't expect, because for years I had believed it, not just believed, it lived it, like it was a law of nature. Poor people don't get choices. Single mothers don't get dignity. Women like me don't get to say no and keep everything at the same time. But standing there, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a different way. I had already lost everything I was afraid of losing, and I was still here. I walked out of the storage room slowly, like my body didn't fully trust my mind yet. Rick was behind the bar again, laughing with a customer like nothing had happened, like I was just another waitress in his rotation of replaceable people. That was when I understood the truth clearly for the first time. He wasn't powerful. He was comfortable. There's a difference. Power is earned, comfort is maintained by people staying silent. And I had been very, very silent for a long time. My shift ended at 2 a.m., but I didn't go home right away. Instead, I stood outside in the cold air behind the bar, watching cars pass on the empty street, thinking about Mason asleep in our apartment, thinking about how many years I had spent surviving without ever actually building anything for us. For the first time, I didn't think, how do I keep this job? I thought, how do I leave this place and still feed my son? And somehow, that question felt less impossible than everything I had accepted before it. I didn't go back to Velvet Room after that night. Not the next shift, not the week after, not even when Rick texted me a short "you're scheduled." Like nothing had changed between us. I didn't reply. The first few days were the hardest, not because I missed the job, but because I kept waiting for the consequences to catch up with me all at once. The rent notice stayed on the counter. Like a threat I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed with overdue reminders. My mind kept trying to convince me I had made a mistake so big there was no way back from it. But something unexpected happened instead. Nothing collapsed immediately. Life didn't explode. It just continued. Messy, uncertain, but still moving forward. I started applying for anything I could find during the day while Mason was at school. Cleaning jobs, grocery stores, cafes, anything that didn't require pretending to smile at drunk strangers for tips that barely covered bus fare. I even walked into a community center I'd passed 100 times but never entered. That's where I learned I could still register for my GED. The woman at the desk didn't look at me like I was broken. She just handed me a form. Start here, she said. Those two words hit me harder than I expected. Start here. Not fix everything, not erase the past, just start. It wasn't a straight line after that. Some days I still felt ashamed. Some nights I still woke up replaying everything, wondering what kind of person I had become just to survive. But slowly, something shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rebuilding. One morning, I was packing Mason's lunch when he looked up at me and said, "Mom, you seem happier lately." I almost laughed, because I didn't feel happy. Not fully, but I wasn't drowning the same way anymore either. I knelt down and fixed his backpack straps, holding my breath for a second longer than I needed to. "Yeah," I said softly, "I think I'm getting there." And for the first time in a long time, I believed that getting there might actually be possible.